Does any one of you have my phone number? Actually, the problem is the broadband at my place has become intermittent since morning. So when it works really well. Otherwise, it simply doesn't work. So once I start the lecture, if it goes away, sometimes I may not even understand that there's no internet connection. So if any one of you have my number, uh, and if I'm cut off from the lecture, please give me a call so that I can connect it through my mobile phone. Okay, it's working right now. It was not working 2 minutes back. Okay, I was trying to connect and it was not working, but it is working right now. But there's no guarantee that it will work for 1 hour. So okay, and I forgot to put the attendance sheet. So how should I do it? Okay, let me prepare one. Give me like 2 minutes, guys. Okay, so guys from CSAI plus you, did you guys get this email? I can see that some of you are already putting the attendance. So does it mean that it now goes away? Otherwise, earlier it was told to me that this form doesn't come up on their emails. Looks like it has started to go back. Is it? It's good because I have to actually send an additional email. I then forward this email to you guys, and which is really additional effort. If you guys keep if you guys can get this email straight away, which is what used to happen before, I think in the first semester, but for some weird reason it stopped working. Okay, let me send it to the IT guys as well, and then we can start. IT plus. Send. Okay, so I've sent it to the IT guys as well, IT plus. I hope that you guys also get it. Okay, so this is the problem, right? It looks like some people get it and some people do not. So I do have to forward these emails anyhow. Okay, so let me forward it.
Sir, I think the auto-generated mails take some time to be delivered. Like the ones from
Okay,
classroom also take some time.
okay, maybe. Let me check then. Sent emails. Okay, I'll just forward these things, right? This is what I usually do. I'll just forward the mail that I get. So CSAI plus and for IT plus. So don't worry, today's lecture should be much better. We'll just talk about code. Um, the last two lectures, which we have not yet discussed in the class, are essentially classes related stuff in C++. I have sent it, guys, on your emails. So, now at least you should be able to mark the attendance. Okay. Uh, mm, yeah, 48, 49. Yeah, I've got like good people now. Okay. So, and how many people are there? 109. Yeah, good enough. Okay. So, yeah, so today's lecture is all about code. Okay, and I think most of you actually like it that way. When we talk about theoretical stuff, it becomes really boring sometimes. It's just that I have to talk about these things because it's important. You do need to understand the concepts as well, not just the coding part, right? So yeah, the concepts might be boring, but I guess today should be much better. Okay, so I think we can start now. Let's start. Mm, okay, share screen. And yeah, I've said that my broadband is highly intermittent today. So if any one of you figure it out that I'm speaking without even knowing that my internet connection has gone off, kindly give me a call. Whomsoever has my number, I think a few of you have, right? I'll just put it on the chat just in case. Just give me a call at this number and tell me that I'm speaking to ghosts, and I'll change it to my mobile phone's internet connection so that we can continue, right? I do have this window that is showing ping constantly, but yeah, once I go to my VM, I'll probably not be able to see this. So please remind me if I'm disconnected. Okay, so how many of you have seen the two lectures? I know the second one is very long. It should have probably been part one, part two, and part three, or maybe the part one part could have been slightly longer. Actually, there were far too many things left in the part two. But like at least you guys have seen part one, and it's not just seeing the parts. In this course, you will also have to start downloading the code, right? It's not just about reading the code. Download it and use the make utility, do all these things. Okay, it's very important. So maybe in ITP just reading the code could have been fine, but here I would like you guys to download the code and play with it. That is the idea. Don't just read it, try to modify it. Figure out concepts on your own. There might not be I can only teach you like the bare minimum topics from C++ in the class. C++ is a very vast language, right? There will be many concepts that we will not be able to cover in the class. So those concepts you should try to learn on your own. Okay, so download all the code fragments that I'm giving you and play with it, right? Try to modify it. See, if something strikes your mind that okay, why have sir written it like this? What if I write it like this? What will happen? Change it and try it yourself. Okay? If you can figure out a nice explanation, it's really good. If you cannot figure it out, of course you can drop me an email. My email reply speed is improving slightly, but it is still not the same as in the ITP days. But I'm hoping it will keep on improving. Okay. So in case you guys want to follow it with me, what you can do is you can go to the week 3 in the code example folder. What are these other two things? Okay, I don't think I need it, but hmm, okay. So yeah, if you want to follow it with me, you can just go to the week 3 of those code examples, download everything, and then you can actually follow stuff simultaneously as well. So let us start. Already cleared. So week 3 has some number of files, right? So let us start with the first file called toy.h. And let's go to the top. Okay, so this is the usual boilerplate stuff, the stuff that we put on at the top and at the end. Why? So that after doing this, I don't care how many times this toy.h gets included in my overall code. The net effect will be that it will only be included once because of these include guards. After that, I'm including this string. I think we have already discussed string in the previous week, that string is basically a class. It's not a basic data type. It's a class which is part of the standard C++ library. And using std, scope resolution operator string, means that wherever I'm going to use string, please allow me to use it without putting std colon colon. So this is a class. Now you guys already know that I think we have already seen that in a class you have fields as well as methods. So this class has some fields. Okay, the first, by the way, this class is trying to represent a toy, right? A toy that you might buy from Amazon. I have a 3.5-year-old son, so I buy a lot of toys from Amazon. So I thought, why not take that as an example. So toy, the only fields that this particular class has are name. So you have the toy's name, its price, and this ID. So ID essentially means that if you have multiple toys at your home, you simply want to differentiate between them. So ID is a kind of a number. It's kind of a serial number. Just like you have a roll number, these toys have an ID. It's a number. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, something like this. And this ID will be different for every toy that we are going to create. Of course, we are not going to create any actual toys, but when I say we are going to create a toy, it means we are going to create an object of class toy. So whenever we create an object of class toy, this ID is going to get a unique number, right? So if for the first object I create, it will probably have the ID 1. The second object will probably have 2, the third object will have 3, so on and so forth. It will never be the same for two objects, right? I mean, as long as there is no overflow and stuff like that, nothing funny. But yeah, in practical terms, what we are trying to achieve here is, for every toy object that we create, I want to give it a specific number, a specific identity. Even if the name and price are the same, I still want it to have a different ID. So basically, I have so many drums at my house, right? My son would buy one drum, and then after a few days he'll get bored. Now he'll want the same drum, probably in different color or something like that. So this happens a lot. So I have a number of toys which are basically the same toys, maybe either slightly different, sometimes exactly the same, but they are two different toys. So this ID is supposed to do that it will give two different IDs to two different objects, even if they are exactly the same. I mean, exactly the same type. There is this counter variable. I'll just talk about it in maybe second iteration when we go through this code. So for now, just forget what counter is doing. Come here. Okay. So there are some methods which are being declared here, right? Now these two methods are known as constructors. Sorry, this method only. This is known as destructor. So a constructor is a method that I can use in order to initialize a new version of a toy. So for example, whenever I'm creating a toy, I want it to be, I want it to have a specific name and a specific price. And I want this thing to be done right at the time of the creation of the object itself. So if I want to do something like that, I need to create a constructor. And what does this constructor take? It takes a string and an int. Why is it taking a string and an int? because essentially there are two pieces of information that I would like my object to be initialized with: the name of the object and the price of the object. So that is why I'm just passing it two parameters. Let us say I had some scenario in which I would like to set the price of the toy later. In the beginning, I just want to give the name of the toy. In that case, the constructor would have looked like this, right? So basically, in this case, I'm saying that I'm creating a parameterized constructor, which is taking a single input, and that input is probably as of now I don't know, but that I'll know when I see the definition of this function. But probably it will be this name. Okay, so if I also had this declaration in the file, it would mean that this class now has two constructors. One constructor where I will be used when I just want to create the object with the name without providing the price. But if I have both the name as well as price, I would like to use this constructor. So what is the job of this constructor? The idea is I want to initialize the fields of the newly created object, and for that I am going to create a constructor. Is this part clear to everyone? Any questions? Constructors are a very important method of the class. So if you have any questions, please ask. I'm still connected, right? Yeah, I'm. Okay. So I hope you guys probably studied constructor while you were preparing for the midsem. So anyhow, so as of now, I'll just remove this one. I'll just have one constructor. By the way, what if I remove even this? Okay, I don't create any constructor at all, right? And it is possible to do that. If you do not create any constructor, it is perfectly fine. What really happens is that the compiler is going to add a constructor for you by default. Okay, so every class will have at least one constructor. Even if you don't provide it, the compiler will provide it. Such a constructor will also be called as the default constructor. It will look something like this, by the way. Okay, no arguments whatsoever. So what will happen really in this case is these fields, whatever are their data types, every data type in C++, based on what data type you are using, whether it is string, whether it is int, whether it is char, float, double, these data types have some kind of default values. Okay, now in many cases this default value could also be garbage value, some random value in the memory location. Okay, so what will happen is if the compiler adds a constructor for you, the default constructor, the values that these fields will get, the values that these fields will be initialized, will be basically the values that are associated in this scenario, right? So it's like creating a variable of that particular type without assigning it any explicit value. So whatever happens, the same thing happens here, right? So it will get whatever is the default for that type of variable here, that type of field. Okay, so let me go back to this. So this is the version that I have. Now there are some methods here. Okay, so what are the methods? Basically, methods are the behavior of the class, right? So essentially, you add methods with the help of you add behavior to a class with the help of these methods. So you can see that there are certain behaviors that I have added to my toy class. It says start playing. It says stop playing. Okay. It says get the name of the toy, and here the return type is string. It says set the price of the toy, get the price of the toy, and get the ID. Okay. One thing that you will often realize, and if you are doing good design, the method names should usually represent verbs. Okay, whereas the fields should usually represent nouns. Okay, so why? Because fields are going to hold the data and methods are going to be the behavior of your class. In some ways you are going to say that any object of this particular class has this kind of a behavior. So if it is a toy, what can you do with it? I mean, you can play with it, right? Basically you can start playing with it, you can stop playing with it, you can get its name. So you can ask the manufacturer what is its name. You can set its price to something else, right? Let us say I initialized it to something, but later I want to change the price. So there is a method called set price. So I can change the price. I can get whatever is the current price set for this particular toy, and then I can get some kind of identification for this toy. So usually, you will see that the methods, if you read them, if you read their names, they should appear as if there is some kind of a work going on. It is a verb. Okay. So start playing is a verb. Get me the price. It's kind of a verb. Okay. Set the price. Get the name of the toy. These are all verbs. Okay. They are not toys. They are not nouns. Okay. Is this part clear, that what is the difference between a field and a method? The fields are basically the places where you store data, and methods are the ones that operate over this data. They are the behavior related to this particular class. Okay. Any queries? Shall I move forward? I think okay, it's working. Yeah, I have to keep checking my internet connection. If there are no queries, I will move forward. If you have a query, please stop me. Otherwise, I will not. So this is how we declared the class. Okay. Sorry. Uh, so this is in this place. All I have done is simply declared a class. I have not provided any definitions here. Okay. So for example, I do not have any definition for this start playing method. So this I am doing in this CPP file. Now this is a convention that I follow. Um, the name of the class dot h is where I put the declarations, and the name of the class dot cpp is where I put the sorry, yeah, the name of the class dot h is where I put the declarations, and the name of the class dot cpp is where I put the definitions. This is just a convention. It is not a necessity. In some languages like Java, for example, there is a strong correlation between the name of the class and the name of the file. In C++, there is nothing like that. Okay. I could have named both these files anything that I wanted to. I could have named them a.h and b.cpp. It was perfectly fine. It is just that whenever you are writing code for a large application, there are so many things that you do which are non-coding things that you do in order to make your lives easier. And these are some of those things that try to have some kind of a correlation between the class and the file name, so that when you want to search for a particular code, you can easily do that. Okay. So this is more of a tip. It's not really required. It's more of a tip. Anyhow, so how do we define the methods that, yeah, by the way, this is the counter variable that we created there. It's a static variable. I'll just come to it after at the end of this definition part. Okay. So this is how you define those methods. You use the scope resolution operator. So this is the name of the class, the scope resolution operator, and the name of the method, and then the parameters. From here onwards, it is similar to defining any common method, right? The any common functions that you guys have done in C. So you put the name of the parameters, and then you start with braces. You do whatever you want within this function, and then you close it, right? So from here onwards, it's exactly the same. The only thing that is differing here is scope, the name of the class, and the scope resolution operator. Now, we'll talk about this ID thing later, but what exactly is this constructor doing? Whatever I am passing to S, it is assigning it to name, and whatever I am passing to I, it is assigning it to price. And then I'm just putting a message, creating a new, the name of the toy, with ID, the ID of the toy. Okay. Now, we also had one more method defined there. It is basically the same as constructor. When you write it, it is basically the same as the constructor, just preceded by a tilde. Okay, or tilde or tilde or whatever people call it. I think it's tilde. It's this weird sign that is on the left of your one key on the keyboard. I don't know whether people actually use that key anyhow, but this is one place where we use this key. So this tilde and the name of the class is the destructor. So constructor and destructor are kind of opposites of each other. Constructor is called when you create the object. A destructor is called when the object is destroyed. Now when I mean destroyed, it doesn't mean you are destroying something physically. Basically, you know that everything in the programming languages have scopes, right? So there is a particular variable, and then you say its scope is, say, within this function, or within this class or within this file or across files, right? So as soon as the scope of an object is as soon as the object the control is out of scope for an object, what happens? The objects, the whatever memory was allocated for this object, that is reclaimed. It can be reclaimed. Whether it is reclaimed immediately or not, we don't know. That is implementation dependent. But at any queries? Okay, I think I heard someone. Yeah. When this object goes out of scope, it has to be recollected back. The memory allocated for it has to be recollected back, and at that point of time, this destructor is called. Now, unlike constructor, this destructor cannot take any arguments. Okay, if you put anything like int I or string s here, you will get an error. Okay, destructors cannot have any arguments. They are defined exactly like this without any arguments. And again, similar to a default constructor, if you do not create a default destructor, the compiler will add one for you. Okay, so the classes does have destructor. It's just that if you don't give them, it is provided implicitly. Here I'm just putting out a message so that you understand when was a particular object destroyed. Then in the start playing method, I'm again just putting out a message. You are now playing with this toy. By the way, here everywhere I'm using name and ID, right? As if they are some kind of local variables or some kind of global variables within this file. And this is the idea that whenever you define a method, you basically treat the fields as if they are a member of a family, right? So you don't need to put any scope resolution operators, names of any objects, anything like that. You simply use the fields. Okay, because there will be a copy of these fields specifically maintained for each object that you create. So here I'm just putting out some messages. You are now playing with this toy, that the toy with this ID is lying idle. And here I'm just returning the name. If you want to set a particular price, this is being done here. Any queries till here? Any questions till here? And then we'll move to counter and static members. Any questions till here? So either we are going too fast or you guys already know these things and I'm probably wasting the time. Uh, anyhow, either way, as long as you understand, it's fine. Okay. So yeah, no questions. Great. So let us start with the static members. Now let's go back to our constructor. Okay, what is this constructor doing? So this is now a problem, right? That each version of this toy that I create, each object of this toy class that I create must be assigned a unique value, right? Now can one way to do that is that I include this ID part here, right? I make this ID thing to be passed from the main. For example, if you are going to create the object from main, then I ask you to give me the ID. Now, the problem with this approach would be, if from the main I provide the same ID for two objects, it is going to be a problem, because in somehow I have violated my promise that each toy will have a different ID, right? So this doesn't seem to be a good solution, that I take even ID as a parameter to the constructor. What I really need is it someone asked any questions? Okay. So what I really need is that there has to be, okay, let me just stop for a minute. Yeah, it's working. Uh okay, I have opened up the pass arguments. No, sure, we cannot pass any arguments to destructor. Okay, this is what we just discussed. Destructors have to be no argument destructors. Any other questions? Okay, sorry, I should keep
Destructors
on.
are
Yeah,
destructors are automatically called,
yeah,
or
they are
do we need to
automatically called.
call? Okay.
They are automatically called whenever your object. So basically there is a term called garbage collection. This term was introduced more by the people from the Java community. I'm not sure what exactly was the term before. I think destruction of the object was probably the term. When Java came into picture, we started using the term garbage collection. And what exactly is garbage in terms of a program? Any memory which is being used used, as in which has been allocated, but it's not really being of any use, right? I mean, because if it is of an object or a variable who's now out of scope, there is no way anyone can access it. So in that case, this memory is garbage, right? Garbage as in you can throw it out. So this whole process of the destructors getting called, destructors are called um, by the let's say implementation. I'm not going to call it the compiler because it's not really the compiler which does it, but basically the idea is the compiler figures it out when to do it. It's implementation dependent. It could happen immediately after a particular object goes out of scope, or it could happen at a later point of time. We really don't know. Okay. That is something that will be dependent on your implementation, but yeah, it is called automatically. You are not supposed to call it. Yeah, out of scope essentially. What happens is it is also applicable when you are doing dynamic memory allocation, but as of now we have not talked about new and delete stuff. So for now, yes, whenever the objects basically go out of scope, the structures are supposed to be called at some point of time after that, maybe immediately, maybe after some point of time. But that is not your headache. You don't have to worry about it. It's the job of the implementation to call the destructor at some point of time. Okay,
Sir, if
so
destructors are called automatically, then what is need for it to call manually?
there is really no need to do that. In fact, the only reason I have added this message is to show you how destructors are called, right? I'll just show you the example, running example. In most cases, other than the cases probably where you have done any kind of dynamic memory allocation, except those cases, you really don't need to provide the destructors. Okay, you can, for all intents and purposes, you can forget that there is anything like a destructor. Okay. But there are some very peculiar cases where you might need a destructor, otherwise you don't need to. Yeah, any other queries, guys? Great. So this is where what we were discussing, that what we really want to do is that whenever some object of class toy is created, I should be notified. I, as in some piece of code, should be notified that a new object has been created, and we should try to keep, let us say, some mechanism by which I am able to give a unique number to this newly created object. Okay. A very simple way to do that is to have a static member variable. Okay. So what are static member variables? Now you see that I told you that name and price, a copy of name and price are maintained for each object that you create. But static members are essentially members which belong not to a particular object, but to a particular class. Okay. So counter, for example, is something that is associated with the class toy and not specifically with any particular object of class toy, right? So it is you can actually access counter without even creating an object of class, and that is what I'm doing here. I'm assigning a value to the counter variable without even creating a single object of this class. By the way, this is the definition for counter. This is static. Fields are slightly tricky, because if you want to follow that principle of not defining anything in the header files, then there is a specific problem associated with static fields. But that is in very advanced cases where the same file could be included via two different ways. Then you might have two different static variable versions. But for now, just don't go into those peculiar cases. The idea is this is the definition for the static field counter, and this statement can be executed without creating any object of class toy. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm assigning the counter variable with the value 1. By default, by the way, static variables are assigned the value 0. Here I am just specifically doing it so that I can show you that this is the definition for the counter variable. Okay, so once I have done this, okay, and this statement will be executed before any object of class toy is created. So you should uh, this is guaranteed that when the first object calls its constructor, the value of counter at that point of time will be 1. So the only thing I am doing here is every time a new object is created, I'm simply incrementing the value of counter. So this will make sure that whenever a new object is created, I get a different value. Okay, the counter variable will keep on incrementing, and I will get a different value for this counter variable. Okay, now is this part clear? Why is that I'm using counter? Counter is a variable that is associated with the class. If you want to access it, you use the name of the class and the scope resolution operator. And this particular object, this particular field, this static field, irrespective of how you change it, right? It could be in the constructor of one particular object, it could be in the constructor of another particular object, it could be in some function like start playing or stop playing. Wherever you change it, okay, it is basically the single copy of the counter variable being shared by all the objects, so the value gets changed. Okay, if you call if you call member function from one object which is changing counter, and then you call the same member function from another object, there will be two changes to counter. That is the idea. Okay, is this part clear? There is only a single copy of counter maintained for toy. It is not created for each and every new object that is created. Any questions on this? Okay, so now that we are already discussing the static variables, let me also talk about the static member functions. So for that, I have a different version of this toy class. Toy 2, it has some more things. So the first thing it has is it has a static member function as well. So similar to the static member fields, static member functions are also basically logically they are associated with the class and not with uh, with a particular object, right? So these are in some way these are the properties of the class. The only you can also define a static method very similar to how you define a static member function. So here if you see reset counter, sorry, so here if you see, this is how I am defining reset counter. If you actually just see the definition between this and this, you cannot tell if this is a static function or not, if this is a static member or not, right? So the definition is done in exactly the same fashion as for the other member functions, but there is just one difference. A static method can only access static fields or some constants. Okay, it cannot, for example, work with name or price. And why cannot so what, for example, if I write something like this here, name equal to something else, this is wrong. Why is it wrong? Can anyone just try to have an intuition and say why is this wrong? Why shouldn't I be allowed to modify a non-static field in a static method? Any idea? Any guesses? What is wrong? What is logically wrong with this? It's syntactically wrong as well, but what is logically wrong here? So the answer here is that
Actually, no
basically,
object is associated with it.
right. So basically, whenever I can use name, this name has to be associated with an object, right? Because I say a different copy of name is maintained for each object. So if I just write name equal to something else, which name am I talking about, right? It has to be something like, by the way, this is allowed if I pass something like this, toy t to toy 2t, right? Yeah, toy 2t to this static method, and then I do t dot name. This is allowed. This is perfectly fine, right? Why? Because now I am telling the compiler I want the name associated with the object t. Then it is fine. Okay, I can access it. In fact, if it is a private member, the here name is a private member, right? Private members are accessible here. This is perfectly right. I can access t dot name within reset counter, but the only way it can access the non-static fields is with the help of an object. Without an object, a static member function cannot access the non-static fields. And why is it so? Because it's logically wrong. This is perfectly right. Why? Because counter is also a property of the class. There is a single copy of counter being maintained. So whenever I write counter equal to 1 or counter equal to 2, it's unambiguous. I can understand what memory location am I talking about here. But this without t dot is ambiguous. That is why I cannot do this. So this is wrong. Any questions on this? Is this part clear? Why cannot I access um, non-static members in a static member function? By the way, it can also call another static method from this. Okay, the reset counter method can also call another static method from it. But if it wants to call start playing, it needs again the name of the object, t dot start playing. Okay, any questions? I'll basically the same way, right? I mean, if this static function is a public function, all I have to do is toy to scope resolution operator reset counter semicolon. That is how you call it. It has to be accessible. It has to be public, by the way. Okay, if it is private, then you cannot call it from outside the class. But if it is a public method, as it is here, the simple thing you can do is toy to scope resolution operator reset underscore counter and semicolon. Any more queries? I think I probably took 1 hour as a lighter time. I'll probably need 15-20 more minutes. Sorry guys, we have a lot of things to cover up. uh, any questions? No. So everyone is clear now what exactly is a static member, what exactly is a static member function, why cannot you access static member variables in static member functions? Because it's illogical. Okay, so let us now run some code. We've been just discussing it. So I have a make file here. Please make it a habit to read make files. um Maybe I'll have a separate lecture sometime for make files, but for now let us just make some files. When did I create a dot out? I'm not sure. This f a dot out. Okay, so let us me just say clean all. Okay, so let me show you this class first. Toy example. This is the first version of. Actually, let me straight away go to second version. We don't have so much time. So this is how you create this object of toy2. This is where I'm passing blocks and 399 as parameters to my constructor. So what will happen? This here I'm creating a type toy2, and then I'm passing these two inputs to the constructor. So the constructor will put the name as blocks and the price as 399, right? And actually I should show you this toy example as well. There is one concept. Someone asked, right, why have we created a destructor? This is why we have created a destructor, so that you can know what exactly is happening here. So basically in within this function func, I am creating another object toy3, and its scope is only within this function. Okay, not outside it. And here I am creating t1 t2, then func is called, and then main go then the main basically ends. So if you run this, Arey yaar, toy example. So this is the first object. It has ID 1. This is T1. This is the second object. It has ID 2. It is T2. This is the third object. This is getting created inside that function func. So then I'm saying start playing, end playing, or whatever, stop playing. And then after this, I have not called the destructor anywhere. But you can see as soon as that method returned, that func method return function returned, the object guitar has been destroyed. Okay, why? Because guitar has now gone out of scope. That is why I just added a destructor, so that you can understand when our destructor is being called. Okay, is this part clear? As soon as the method function returned, it is the guitar which is destructed first. because T1 and T2 are still in scope. They are destructed later. And within the same function, if there are two objects that you've created, they are destroyed in the opposite order of their creation. So the object that was created at the end will be destroyed first, and the object that was created later will be destroyed later. Why? Because you know how stacks work. LIFO, last in first out. There is a role of a stack. I think I had mentioned it in the homework also. So why is it that this variable, this one with ID2 is destructed first and this one with ID1 is destructed later? Because of it has something to do with stack. Anyhow, so this is the second example. Sorry, what happened? Okay, not two. So there is one more thing that is happening here. I'm passing a variable now. I'm passing an object here by value. By the way, this is passing by value. Okay, I'm passing this object by value to a function called func here. Now, what really happens when we pass something by value? You guys remember, right? That basically the value is copied. It's only the value that travels from the caller to the called function, and the value gets copied there, right? So what exactly do I need to do here? I need to copy all the values associated with toy t to this new version of toy t, right? Now this will create a problem. What will it do? The problem is, it will actually create, it will simply, if you do not do anything else, a new type of constructor called the copy constructor is added by the class, by the compiler to your class. And this copy constructor, its job is, as its name is, its job is to copy a particular object. Its job is to create a copy of a particular object. So a copy constructor is called whenever you do things like this. For example, when you pass an object by value to a function, or you do something like function toy t1 t2 equal to t1. Okay, in that case also a copy constructor is called, because you have to create a copy of one object into another. Now the default copy constructor simply copies everything from one field to the another field of the object. And in this case, what will happen is that this new t that is getting created here, it will also get the same id as this t, right? It might be slightly problematic, but I wanted you guys to know that this t, the one in function func, is a copy of this t. So that is why I also added a copy constructor in this toy2 class. And this is how the copy constructor looks like. Basically, this is how you pass a variable by reference. If you remember our discussion, I told you that in C you only have call by value and call by reference, and which essentially was basically call by pointer. In C++, you also have a specific concept of a reference. Okay, and this is how you create a reference. You put an ampersand before the name of that variable, right? So here, copy will be it will be, literally a copy of whatever is passed to the copy constructor. And copy constructor is often called by default. You don't have to explicitly call it. The implementation will call the copy constructor of the class if you have provided it. Otherwise it will add a copy constructor for you. So what is happening here is I've just added a line here creating a copy of this toy, so that you don't get confused. Why do I have the same toy being created twice with the same id, right? And this is why when I run toy2 example, you can see what uh, yeah, creating a new blocks with id1, creating a copy of blocks with id1. And here, the destructor is the same, right? The destructor is basically having the same method, same message. There is no copy destructor, anything like this. The destructor is only one. So you are seeing this this message twice here, because there were two objects with the same id, and that is why you are getting this message. Any questions on this? I think what we have now is inheritance. The next thing we'll look at is inheritance. Any questions? Okay, got it. Mm, so I think the concept of inheritance is already clear, right? That what exactly is inheritance? Basically, you're trying to create hierarchies. That there is some behavior, some class, and there is another class which is, let us say, a more generalized version of this class. So in that case, the generalized version class could be the base class, and the specific version class could be the derived class. So let us have a look at one such instance. So there are toys, right? And now within toys, there is a class of toys called the battery operated toys, in which you have to put a battery. So for example, that blocks, the blocks which kids play with, it doesn't require any battery, right? You simply put one block over the other and you can play with it. You don't need a cell, for example, or a battery for it. But if you buy, let us say, a piano, you have to put in some three AA batteries in it before you can play with it, right? So I'm saying that there is another class that I'm going to create. I'm calling it the class battery operated toy. And I want to basically mention that this is an instance. This is a more specific instance of the toy class, right? So this is how you inherit a class into another class. You put this colon here, then you put either a public, a private, or a protected here. I'll just tell you what protected is. And then you put the name of the base class. So toy 2 is the base class, battery operated toy is the derived class. Now everything till here is pretty much the same. Basically, I'm just adding some more fields to it: battery type, number of batteries, whether the batteries are already installed or not, whether the toy is currently being used or not. Okay, so and by the way, I am also violating some of my own guidelines that I told you, right? That this should in use is probably not the best of the names, right? In use, you can say it's not really a noun, right? It's probably, I don't know what exactly is it in use, whether it is a verb, whether it is noun, whatever it is. It's basically a question in use, whatever it is. So I have added some fields here, and then there are some more fields here, and then there are some more methods here. The methods are putting the battery, take out all the batteries, things like this. So I've added some. So these are only applicable to the battery operated toy. It is not applicable to the generic toy. So you don't put this class, this method called put battery. Why didn't I put this method put batteries in the toy class itself? Because not every toy needs batteries. It's only the battery operated toys which need this method. This is a behavior of a battery operated toy, not of every toy in the world. So that is why I have added it here. But these start playing and stop playing methods, they are basically being imported from toy 2 only. Okay, we'll see why we are overriding them. You already know the concept of overriding. I'll just show you the example also. So we put them here because we are overriding them. If we were not if we did not want to override them, even these declarations were not required. Now coming back to the protected part. So you know that private members cannot be inherited, right? Private members are never inherited. It is a property of the class. And why cannot it be inherited? You remember that weird example of pizza dough, and converting the pizza dough into Maggie or something like that. So you don't want certain behavior, certain properties of a class to be inherited by its derived class. So you basically make them private, right? So private members are not inherited. But let us say I want something to be inherited by my derived classes. One way to do that will be to put them in the public section. But then once you put them in the public section, they are available to everyone outside the class. What you really need is a very peculiar case where it is accessible to the derived class, but not to anyone in general. In such cases, and only such cases, do you need the third access specifier, and that is protected. Okay, so protected is basically exactly the same as private, as long as there is no so if there are no derived classes deriving from battery operated toy, then protected and private doesn't it doesn't matter. Everything in protected is essentially private, right? But let us say there are some classes which are going to subclass or extend battery operated toy. In that case, if I want these methods or these members to be inherited by that class, only then I use the uh, uh, protected access specifier. And this public here, what does it mean? Public basically means whatever is public there becomes public here. Whatever is public in toy 2 becomes public in battery operated toy, and whatever is protected in toy 2 becomes protected in battery operated toy. So basically that is kind of the default, that whatever is where it remains there. If I make it protected, then what happens? The protected members are going to be protected in battery operated toy as well, but even the public members from toy 2 will now become protected members in battery operated toy, right? So basically it narrows down the access to the public members of toy 2 in battery operated toy. And if I make it private, again it's the same thing. Both public as well as protected members of toy 2 will become private members of battery operated toy. Is this part clear? I should have kept some water with me. Okay, this is the idea. There is a picture, by the way, in the slides. Okay, if you guys are still getting confused, go and check that picture. That picture tries to tell you where will these things go. If you don't understand it here, just open up that presentation and check that picture. That will get clear to you. Okay, so this is how I inherit some class into another class. Now there are some peculiarities associated whenever you are inheriting one class into another. One thing is this virtual thing, right? What exactly is this virtual? So you guys have already seen the example of overriding, right? Now in a sense, whenever you expect that a particular uh, function, a particular method may have to be overridden by some derived class of this class, I simply flag that method as virtual. So what is the advantage of flagging it as virtual? Basically, at the runtime, whenever I use a particular object to call this particular method is ready for playing, um, based on the type of the object, the implementation is able to figure out which version of this method, if I have multiple definitions for this method, which version of this method is supposed to be invoked. Okay, it decides it by the on the basis of the type of the object. By the way, if I don't make this thing as virtual, you can still do the overriding thing. It's just that in technically speaking, it is not overriding but hiding. Okay, so what really happens is you simply hide the implementation in the base class from the with the help of giving a same implementation in the derived class. It's not really overriding, right? Overriding is the proper way in which we do in which we actually extend behaviors. In fact, in some languages like Java, you don't need this virtual keyword at all. Whenever you define a new version of a method, by default it is considered as overriding. Okay, so this virtual keyword, we'll see where is it being used. There's one more thing that is there. Whenever we create an object of battery operated toy, what really happens, what has to happen, is that the process goes bottom up, right? So the implementation has to first create an object of toy 2. Why? Because everything that is in toy 2, that is also a part of battery operated toy, right? Even the private members are not accessible to the derived class, but you still have to create them, right? Why? Because let me give you an example. There is a public method in toy 2 which tries to access the name and ID, right? Now name and ID are private, so certainly battery operated toy will not get an access to it. So if I try to do battery operated toy B, and when I do B dot name, that is illegal. Name is not accessible to me. No, it has not yet been inherited. Not has been inherited, but it is still accessible to the start playing method of my toy class, right? Toy 2 class. So this is why it's not like you can skip creating those fields, right? You still have to allocate space for the private members of the base class. Why? Because the members of the base class, if they are, let us say, public, they are still going to use them. So you still have to create a complete toy2 object, and then over that object you need to create an object of battery operated toy. So it might be slightly confusing at this point of time. Why do I need a toy object? But that is how inheritance works. You start at the bottom of the hierarchy, you create an object of that bottom class, and then you keep on moving one level up, and you keep on adding more behavior, more fields to this object. It's just that some of these fields might be inaccessible because they are private in the hierarchy. Is this point clear? Can you guys now um imagine what I'm trying to say? So basically, whenever I create an object of battery operated toy, the name, price, and ID, I also have to set aside space for these three fields. And then I have to set aside space for battery type, number of batteries, batteries installed, in use. So essentially, an object of type battery operated toy essentially has 7 fields, not 4, right? Even though those 3 fields are private and they are not directly accessible, the amount of space that is allocated are for 7 fields. Is this part clear? If you have any doubts, please ask now. This is a very important concept in object oriented programming, that objects are created in the reverse order. It starts from the base classes, and then you keep on moving one step forward. And then the last object, the last type of object that you are creating, that constructor is called at the end. And do you understand why? I am basically creating an object hierarchically here. This is why the battery operated toy object is being created hierarchically. Is this part clear? I'm hoping it is. Otherwise, go and read some books, maybe. Try out some code. Code it on your own. See what is use that size of operator and see what are the sizes of these objects and so on and so forth. Um, Whatever way you want, you can verify whatever I'm saying is correct or not. So as I said, I must first call some constructor of the toy2 class before the constructor of battery operated toy could be called. That is the problem. So during the definition of this constructor, there is a way to do that. This is how it is done. You basically take more arguments than required in this constructor. Why? Because I only needed 2 arguments actually, for the battery type and the number of batteries. But in order to create a toy, I also need the name and the price. So what I'm doing here is this parameterized constructor of battery operated toy is now taking 2 plus 2 parameters, and these 2 parameters, the first 2 ones, are basically forwarded to the constructor of toy2. So please keep this in mind. This is a function call here. Okay, this part, this is a function call, right? I'm implicitly, it's not even implicit, it is basically explicitly invoking the default, not default, the parameterized constructor of the toy2 class, and I am passing this s and this I as parameters to the toy2 constructor. After this function call returns, only then my control goes here. Okay, and then I'm basically assigning all these things to here, right? Now if I run the example for this example, I will not talk about the virtual functions and friend functions here. We'll talk it in the next extra class. Just understand this part. This is very important. Okay, if you have any questions, we'll take 5 more minutes and just discuss this. So what exactly am I doing here? The first parameter to this battery operated toy constructor is the name of the toy. This is the price, this is the type of the battery, and this is the number of batteries. And when I run this, see what is happening. Where is this thing coming from? Can you guess from where has this cout message come from? This has come from more here. This is where it is coming from. Okay. So this particular message came from this particular constructor. Then the constructor of battery operated toy was called. Yeah, and then I am doing all that stuff, putting the battery and switching it on and switching it off. We'll discuss the virtual functions later. But is this part clear, guys? Do you understand what really happened? I did not remember. I did not create an instance of toy 2. I created an instance of battery operated toy. But the constructor of toy 2 was called in the background, right? And in fact, if we had an even higher hierarchy, so let us say if toy 2 was a derived class of some other class, abstract toy, so then the first thing that would have been called, then toy 2 would have had to make a call to abstract toy in its constructor, and this delegation will continue until it reaches a class which is not a derived class of any class, and then from there onwards it will come back. Okay, so the first constructor will be abstract toy, the next constructor will be toy 2, and then the third constructor will be battery operated toy. Okay, this part is clear. Any questions? We will not go any further. This is fine. The next extra class will be not. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain about that memory part again?
Yeah, so let me open up, let me stop sharing it for a while, and let me open a text pad or something like that. Just a minute. Window. Yeah. Okay. So see, so what exactly is happening here? A battery operated toy. I'm just calling it BPT. Let for now. Just to battery operated toy is basically a uh, specialized version of toy, right? So basically, every property that is a property of toy is also a property of battery operated toy plus something else. That is the idea, right? So if I tell you, please give me a battery operated toy, please create a battery operated toy. If there are anything that is done for all the toys in the world, that has to be done first, right? So for example, let us assume that there is some toy manufacturing company which only manufactures plastic toys, whether it is battery operated or non-battery operated. So what is probably the first step in the manufacturing process? They have to maybe melt the plastic, something like that, right? And then once the plastic has been melted, they put it into different kinds of casts, and then they basically get it out as one specific toy, right? But step one is the same, right? Step one is you melt the plastic, so all the plastic is melted. Then some could be diverted to creating blocks, and some could be diverted to making, let us say, pianos, right? So that is the same thing that happens in computer science as well. If I am going to create an instance of battery operated toy, the first thing that happens is an instance of toy is created, and then more properties and behaviors is added over it. That is the idea. So essentially the process is like this: you first create a toy. I do this. First create a toy, right? So a toy gets created. You can call it T. You first create a T, and then over this T you add. So in T, what do you add? You basically have, right, name and what, ID and something more, price, right? So you first create this toy variable, toy object, and it has these three fields: Now this is in some ways hidden from the battery operated toy. Why? Because it is private. And then in memory you add more stuff to it like this. So you basically add um, battery type and battery number, whatever it is, and then something like this. This is how your memory will look like. Is this part clear? Basically, so your object is constructed in a hierarchical fashion. So it starts at the bottom of the hierarchy. It first goes there. Whatever are the fields of that class, they are created. Then you need some more space for the derived class. Then some more space for the next derived class. You basically go through this chain. Does it make more sense now? The idea is that you start from the most generic version of that object, and then you keep on specializing it. I'm not sure whether this is the best way to explain it, but do you understand that what exactly is happening? You first create a toy, right? This toy has no identity. It is just a toy. And then you say, okay, this is a battery operated toy. That is the idea, right? So you first melt the plastic. That is the step one, right? And then you say, okay, now I need a piano or I need a block. But that's melting the plastic is exactly the same. Whether you create blocks, whether you create piano, you still have to melt the plastic. So that is what is happening, that in this whole chain, whenever you create the instance of a derived class, the instance of the base classes, if we are having multiple levels of of inheritance, so then all the base classes must first be created before the object of the derived class is created. Is this part clearer, guys? What I suggest you guys can do is just write some code and have like multiple hierarchies. Write a code where there are four classes, A and B and C and D, right? B inherits A, C inherits B, D inherits C. Put some C out statements in their constructors as well as destructors, and then see what really is happening. Okay, why is it? And I told you the logical reason for it. The logical reason is this, that basically you have to first create the generalized version and then you make it more specific. And in C++, what happens, in order to see that, you can simply write some code, A, B, C, D classes, and you can see how it works out. Okay. Yeah, sorry I took 12 minutes more. I can see that the attendance has already dropped, so I guess most people have already left. Yeah, so but we'll take it up from here. We'll talk about two more things: virtual functions and friend functions, and then yeah, one more thing. The project evaluation for BTech final year has been shifted to Thursday. So I do have free tomorrow, but now it is a bit too late for me to prepare a lecture. I'll try my best to prepare a lecture for tomorrow, for tomorrow's classes. If I'm able to do that, I will inform you, let us say by 11 p.m. or so in the night, that there will be a class tomorrow. If I am not able to, in that case too, I will inform you by 11:30 that there will be no class. Okay. By default, there is no class. I'll try my best to prepare a presentation so that we can have a class tomorrow. Okay. Please inform it to everyone else who have already left that we may have a class tomorrow. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, Dhruv, we need to have a separate discussion, guys. Shall we have it on a Sunday? I'll take a 1 hour 1 hour lecture. That will be optional. Should it be optional? No, I don't think it should be optional. Everyone have to do the project. Uh, I want to tell you what I expect from you guys in a project, and in that, and I'll, if you want, I can show you how make files work. Okay, I see. I'm telling you my story. The most exciting thing that I came to, that actually drew me towards building applications in C++ was these make files. They always excite me. How do you put so much code in so many different files, and then you make just one make file and they all put in there. I have to talk to the TAs they were in. Actually, I think some of even some of the TAs also have COVID. Uh, at least one I know. So that is why I'm not pushing them. And I understand the labs are very important. So I'll drop them an email today. Let me check up on their health as well. What is happening at their end. Labs are certainly important. But of course this week I was told not to take classes from Monday to Wednesday. So this is probably illegal. I should not have taken this class today. But yeah, I was told not to take classes from Monday to Wednesday. So um, we can do that too, through. In fact, that is probably a better thing to do. uh, I can give you problems and you can write code for it, and then the TAs can simply have a look at the at your submissions. We'll have one lab exam for sure. Okay, towards the end, a week before the final exam, we will have a lab exam. But I'm open to changing lab exams. Uh, okay. So really, this is not a bad idea as well. We can actually take out the projects from the theory evaluation of the course and put it in the lab evaluation. We can do that, but usually we do that for slightly senior students, maybe in fourth or fifth semesters. I'm not sure how many of you will actually be even able to handle projects. I'm still skeptical. That's for some of you, projects will be much harder. So that is why labs are much more simpler. So that is why, right, I do not want to merge it with the labs, right? For some of you it might be very difficult to do a project straight away. So let us have the labs part. Assignments is okay. Assignments are pretty much like labs only. It's just that doing it live, you write the code at your home and submit it. And uh, yes, I'm not planning to put too much of weightage on project. um, to be honest, the only reason I'm introducing projects for you in second semester is because I thought whatever you learn in this course, because right, there in this course there are so many boring things also. And these boring things, unless you apply them on a real world problem, you'll never really learn those things. So unless you apply this inheritance hierarchy related stuff in your code, you will feel, why do I need inheritance? I can define everything in one class. But if you build a typical application, you will know what is how important inheritance is, how it saves your time. So that was my idea. I still don't have much of a confidence whether everyone will be able to do projects or not. But I still want to have a go at it, right? Maybe not too too extensive, but you guys should certainly do some kind of project, not where you will also have to create diagrams, by the way. Okay, it won't just be code, it will be documentation along with code. So it will be like um, a dry run for you guys before not really flowcharts. We'll study some specific type of diagrams. Yeah, UML is the correct answer. Yeah, you'll learn how to create class diagrams and state diagrams and stuff like that. So some very simple class diagrams and state diagrams, they all will be a part of your project. So it's not just coding. In fact, coding will actually be much simpler, to be honest. Um, I'll talk about some mock project on Sunday, I'll probably say, right? And I'll like, I actually, the problem is I wanted to create these diagrams for a mock project and then show it to you. This COVID and my family situation has made it so difficult for me. I could hardly get what 2 hours or 2.5 hours a day to work because of my family situation. And even if I extend it, it is like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. So I'm really down on as far as the amount of time I can give. Otherwise I would have actually created a mock project. No, a whole end to end mock project I would have created and given it to you guys. This was what I planned to. But my family is still. I mean, they've all recovered. They've all recovered from the problem, but uh, like they already had medical issues before, and things have just become worse. So there are so many things I have to do around in the house. So it has become really difficult to give out time. But yeah, on Sunday we'll sit. We'll see what we can do in projects. I still want you guys to do something at least. You'll learn something. So we'll probably talk about it on Sunday. One more, if I can have the classes tomorrow, then we will probably not have an extra lecture. um, Actually, I should have an extra lecture anyhow. I have to complete the virtual and uh, friend functions. So we'll see. I'll email you guys by 11:30 in the night if we are going to have a class tomorrow. Okay. So first thing in the morning, just check up your email. If you sleep early, if you sleep late, then you'll probably catch my email before that. Okay, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, sir,
Yeah.
I had extended out from the email. So,
Yeah,
sir,
sure.
yeah, so basically, sir, when we say we have a friend function, what we're basically trying to do is give it access to the private
Mhm.
variables of the class while making it
Yeah.
global.
No, that is not the case, right? Friend function could be any function that is not a member function. Okay, so essentially the idea is private members of a class are, as it says, private, right? It is a property which is only accessible within the realms of the class. If I want to give the access to these private members to anyone who's not a member function, if it is a member function, you don't need to be friend, right? You can anyhow access everything. But if you need to give access to anyone who is outside the class, now what could be outside the class? It could be a global function. It could be a function which is a member function but of some other class, right? These are the two common examples, right? Or it could be some code, right? I mean, which is lying in some other file. Yeah, basically it's a global function, as I said, right? So it's either a global function or, let us say, a member function of another class, and you make this function a friend of this class if you want that function to be able to access the private members of this class.
And to make a friend, we just prototype it inside
Right,
the class that we
right,
want it to be the friend of.
right.
So, sir, in that particular case, when I was not making it a friend function, I was taking a single argument only. When I was trying to give two arguments, it was saying ki, you can only give one argument, and
the
that
the
is un-
problem the best guess that I have is, because this operator, right, it is also the right shift operator. Okay. So
right.
basically what happens is, this right shift operator is already being overloaded by the OStream class. Okay. So you are not really doing operator overloading here. Basically, it is not really operator overloading. You are actually defining an additional definition for that already overloaded operator. You understand the distinction here. In When you are trying to do it within your class as a member function, this is my best guess. I still don't know how do they differentiate between right shift and this. Okay. To the best of my guess, I mean, the best guess that I can make is, this right shift operator, it only behaves like that insertion operator in case of streams. For every other class, it is treated as a right shift operator, right? So when you're
Right.
trying to define it as a member function, it could be possible that uh, the implementation is expecting that you are defining an overloaded right shift operator. Okay, so then binary, unary, there might be some issue, right? What should be the first operand, what should be the second operand? There could be some issue like that. But then I also searched on Google, what do people usually do. So then I sent you that
The
that link,
article.
right? Geeks for Geeks link. So it does say that it has to be a friend function, and it should not be a member function of the class, right? So they said the other possibility is certainly to make it a member function of the OStream class. Okay, so now I really don't know whether it is directly possible or not, whether the newer versions of C++ have some kind of security mechanisms where I simply cannot add a member function to a standard library class. So I think the best of both worlds is to have it like a friend function. You get it? That
Right.
basically there are three options: member function of class A, member function of class B. Here A and B are box and O stream, or the third option is friend. So if both A and B could the problem with A is that there could be ambiguity between right shift and this one. The problem with B is that I don't really know. I simply don't know whether it is even possible to add a method to a standard template library class. So certainly the C method is C way is the best way to do it, right?
So,
Using a
sir, but then like when we are defining the first part, when you said there could be
Mhm.
ambiguity, we are
Mhm.
saying ki it is going to retain an OS stream reference variable. Then why would
Yes, right. So basically the idea is like this operator overloading when you do, right? The only thing that you do is essentially provide some prototype. You are absolutely right that if it is O streams, if what I'm trying to tell you is the implementation might not be having any scenario in which this prototype is occurring. You understand that basically the scenario
okay,
in which because it might be assuming that this is the right shift operator, so the return type should be int, right?
because
So
we
or
only
something
have
like
one argument.
right,
It's
right.
expecting
So
us to have two arguments, even though it's
um,
inside. So we have to
yeah,
make it a member function in that case.
yeah, and maybe the argument too has to be int type only, because the right shift operator is basically a binary operator where both operands are integer. You understand that this could
Right.
be another issue. So maybe it is not finding any prototype to which it can match this particular function prototype, right? In the global world, there is no scenario in which a right shift operator returns an O stream type. Maybe something like this. So this could be an issue. This is the best guess that I have. I'll have to maybe sit someday and look at all your errors again.
So,
Then I could
yes, so
right.
one
So
final thing, when we
yeah.
define it a friend, it suddenly asked me for two arguments, and when I was not
Mhm.
defining it a friend, it was asking me for only one. Why did that
Yeah.
change
That
happen?
is because whenever it is not a friend, whenever it is a member function, the object is implicitly given to it. Okay, so
Right.
the reason that you don't have to give the second argument is because the object is given to it implicitly. So you don't need the object. It is
Right.
given via the this pointer. There is a concept of this pointer.
Yeah. So that
Yeah. So the
makes
second
sense.
argument is this. That is why you don't need the second argument.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye, sir.